The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. Live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Good day, good night, and welcome to Soccer Today, MLS Cup postgame show. I'm Kevin Laramee, joined today by Tristan Amours. Tristan, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. Congratulations to the Seattle Sounders for the win, their first win on home soil in front of the most attended event at CenturyLink Field, more than any of the Seahawks games. That's quite the feat. Congratulations to them.
That's quite the feat, and that's quite the accomplishment. And a lot of people for MLS Cup this time around in Seattle 3, Toronto FC 1, 3-1 at the end of this match. A surprising result if you look at the first half. And it took a long time for this game to go, I would say, in overdrive, because we were expecting a bit more goals than we actually did have in this game, Tristan. But at the end of the day, we actually did get the goals. They just came in the second half.
It's funny because we were taking notes while the game was going, and I have one page of notes for the first half and another page for the second half, and it's almost like I can really just take care of the page for the second half. It's the game really started at the 57th when the first goal was scored. I kind of thought it was a Justin Moore own goal. They ended up giving it to Leerdam, but yeah, I mean, just first off, I remember off the air when I first came in to watch the game with you, Kevin, I was saying I'm going to say at some point during the show that Omar Gonzalez is the best defender of all time in MLS, and I can't say that today. I really can't, because first of all, you cannot tell me that, and I tweeted about that earlier in the game. You really can't tell me right now at MLS Cup 2019 that Omar Gonzalez is at least 85% ready.
No, he's not. He has to be injured. It was one thing to see him late in the game. It's another to see him start and being exposed early and a couple times in the second half. Directly responsible, at least indirectly responsible of one of the goals, directly responsible for another one in this one, and the two decisive goals, the first two goals by Seattle. And all game long, we saw Omar Gonzalez not necessarily taking the right decision. And I don't know if that's driven by injury, but the first pass he was making, trying to relaunch the attack at some point, was not accurate. You've seen it a couple times. On set pieces, not placed correctly. A little one step off of offensive set pieces, too. On corners, he was close. Toronto did not get a lot of corners, but on a couple of occasions, Gonzalez could have been dangerous on corners for Toronto, and it was just a foot away, just so close, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you go back to the first half, that free kick, I believe Pozuelo was on the free kick. That ball really goes straight for Omar Gonzalez, and you can see that he doesn't have the speed to get to that ball. That's where, I mean, even then, and then the last play of the first half, if that wasn't for Quentin Westberg, it would be 4-1. Seattle would be 1-0 up at the half if it wasn't for Westberg. Yeah, Omar Gonzalez, at this point, and looking at the game, it's almost like TFC could have used Laurent Simon for 90 minutes instead of Omar Gonzalez, which is disappointing for Omar for sure. But why not? If you're in a final, maybe give it to your healthier players. That, granted, the level of Omar compared to the level of Laurent Simon is different, but at least one of them is healthy and can give you 90 good minutes.
What Omar Gonzalez is really good at compared to Laurent Simon is something that wasn't used by Toronto FC during this game. Aerial threat, of course, offensively, defensively, being able to clear the boxes. Seattle had 8 corners in the first half and over 12, I believe, at the end of this game. And you're seeing Toronto, they were vulnerable on set pieces. And Omar Gonzalez is supposed to be that piece that helps you being more confident on set pieces as a central defender, and that wasn't here. And he was vulnerable on the run of play, and Toronto FC got scored on the run of play during this game, which wasn't the case in MLS Cup versus Seattle before. The two of them combined, Toronto did not concede a goal on the run of play to Seattle. It was penalties in 2016 and Toronto won 1-0 in 2017. Today, there was 3 goals from the run of play of Seattle, and Omar Gonzalez has to be responsible, like I was saying, for 2 of those.
Yeah, and also on that first goal, Benezet, with that trying to get defensively on Leerdam, he was miles too late. It was quite telling, and then you have obviously that second goal where Omar gets taken again. Great shot there by Rodriguez at the top of the box. You got to give it to him. Westberg tips the ball. He was just there, and that's the thing with Westberg. He's not a very tall keeper, so he's not gonna try and really. He really has to be more acrobatic than the typical more taller keepers. But yeah, I mean, again, you got to give it to Seattle. You really saw at about when the first goal was scored, about in the 57th, you saw that Toronto was just trying to reaching to get that to get to not necessarily to Seattle's level, but you saw that at some point TFC was kind of out of that game.
We'll get to TFC and why they lost the game in a few minutes. I think it's worthy to talk about Seattle and what they did right in this game, because obviously Seattle won this one. Toronto did not lose this one. Seattle did win this one. 3-1 for Seattle. Leerdam scored. Leerdam, I was telling to Tristan watching the game, is one of my favorite fullback in the league just because of his attitude going forward. And sometimes he does create mistakes, but how quickly you forget your mistake and you continue to push through, continue to go forward to trying to push the ball. And on his attempt on goal, deflected off Justin Morrow, the opening goal of the 2019 MLS Cup, I think really changed the momentum. At that point, Seattle was defending, and we were all wondering, between you and I and Duane and I were texting also, and wondering what in the heck is Seattle's tactics, parking the bus in the first 50 minutes of this game, trying to absorb. And in the first 10 minutes, we observed that Toronto was penetrating a lot. The defense of Seattle were creating opportunity, but not really any dangerous shot on net or look. And then Seattle was able to find a way to absorb a bit more without creating chances. But they were absorbing for 55 minutes, giving 65% of the possession to Toronto. And we were wondering, what in the world is Seattle thinking? I guess Brian Schmetzer knew something that we didn't.
Fair. And that's where you really saw that Toronto was missing a guy like Josie Altidore in the first half, because so many times we saw Tsubasa Endo being that guy in the box. And Endo's not that player that is going to get you goals in the 6-yard box or get his head on the cross as opposed to a guy like Kim Ki-hee, who I believe deserves a lot of credit. Is not a player that we talk about as much as we should. And there's a specific play in the first half where Endo gets completely physically handled by I believe it was Kim, where he just physically cannot be up to the challenge, because that's not the type of player he is. He's more of a winger type guy, and that's where really you missed a guy like Altidore, and you saw it. I mean, Altidore got a goal late in the game. He was on the header and got that goal. Obviously, he was far away from being 100%. We barely even know if he warmed up.
I don't know. We were just... Here's the sequence of events. At the 64th minute, Luke Wildman of TSN, we both watched the game on TSN. It was an ABC in the United States, TSN in Canada, TVA Sport also in Canada, tuned in across the Latin, Spanish-speaking Americas, I imagine, and the rest of the world also on DAZN, MLS Live, and wherever you were watching the game. So at the 64th minute, we hear from our commentators here, Luke Wildman and Stephen Caldwell, that Josie Altidore is still not warming up. He's still on the bench of TFC, and then the camera pans out to the bench of TFC, and Josie Altidore is putting a jersey on. Like, okay, but we were just told he hasn't warmed up yet. Did he actually warm up? That's my question to you. Did he actually warm up? To you, Tristan, or to anyone listening that was present, did you see him warm up or no?
Yeah, we were both asking that. We both tweeted that. I mean, I was expecting someone over in Seattle to kind of reply. I was hoping that. I was trying to go fishing for a reply, but it didn't end up happening. But yeah, it felt Kevin very much like an emergency sub. That he was, we saw Greg Vanney trying to fish for some energy. We saw with De Leon subbing in for Endo, and it was just trying to get some energy in because at that point TFC was on the verge of maybe losing that game, right? So even at first, just watching, I had my eyes on Altidore, and it was, he was barely even jogging. He was walking around. It didn't seem like he was very involved. He was the type of player, like, it felt like the guy, his mission was just don't be offside and just try and be there when the ball is near your area, which is what happened in the goal where he scored. He got that header, but it was too little too late. And that's the unfortunate story for Toronto FC. There was Omar Gonzalez not being there for most of those playoffs, and fortunately for them, the partnership with Mavinga and Simon ended up panning out and being which we also need to give credit to Toronto FC in this playoffs, because even a few weeks ago, we did not think that this team was going to go all the way to MLS Cup final.
No, Duane said it, and I didn't believe him, and I told him it was crazy off air. Like, he told me, mark my words, after the Toronto's win against DC, he's like, Toronto's going to MLS Cup final. Like, I don't believe you, but I guess I should have.
Clearly. But I'm quite happy that it was almost like a boxing event. It was who will be the undisputed champion after 1-1 each, and now it's over in Seattle. It felt like what was it, Rocky IV when they go to Russia? And
yes.
And then they go
Drago.
and then that's it. So, but the Sounders ending up winning it, and just seeing the crowds, and it was and Brian Schmetzer, kudos to him. Finally getting his time to shine after a full season as a head coach. When he won last time, he wasn't a head coach in his full season. But it's just tells you once again, do not bet against the Seattle Sounders.
Yeah, and it was a discussion that Tristan and I had during the game. I was wondering, now it's 2019, it's the wrap of the 2010 decade. This is coming up soon. Who's the team of the decade? And of course, you have the LA Galaxy, who won in 2011, 2012, and 2014. And now you have the Seattle Sounders, who won only twice, 2016 and 2019, but were present in 2017 and made the playoffs in every single year of the decade. So which one of the two is more impressive to you, Tristan? Winning twice in 10 years or making the playoffs 11 straight years?
To me, the team of the decade is still the LA Galaxy. I really, they kickstarted what MLS is right now. The three DPs with Landon, Robbie, and Bex. I truly enjoyed those teams, and you look at the three DPs, but there was also solid defensive back lines, which is non-existent in LA right now. You had AJ De La Garza and Omar Gonzalez being there in the back line. I truly believe that this is the team of the decade. However, the Sounders are just unequivocally the most consistent team since that dynasty of the LA Galaxy. That's why you really cannot bet against those Sounders. And to make the hockey analogy, because I mean, at the end of the day, we're all Canadians. They really are the Detroit Red Wings of MLS. They're always there. They're always making the playoffs. And regardless, they're not the team that has the most trophies. They're not the team with the most MLS Cups. But at the end of the day, it's almost a sure bet that the Seattle Sounders are going to find a way to make the playoffs and find a way to be competitive in those playoffs. It's just unequivocal. Every single year they find a way. Now this year, the big debate was, will Rui Diaz be decisive in those playoffs? And turns out he was. Kudos to Rui Diaz.
He was decisive late in this one. It wasn't really influential to the result of today's game, but he was in the playoffs.
In the playoffs, yeah.
Exactly. On the lead up to today's game, he was instrumental in Seattle's record in the playoff this year. A couple of things I want to run by you, Tristan. When we're looking at this game and looking at, tactically speaking, how TFC approached this game, we were expecting a rabbit out of the hat of Greg Vanney. That rabbit never came to fruition, never appeared out of the hat today. We were maybe even expecting a 5-man backline, maybe going to a tactic that worked well a few years ago. And if you had a Gonzalez not 100%, but you surround him with Sima and Morrow, you have yourself with a bit more coverage in the midfield. Well, in the middle of the backline, I want to say. And it turns out that maybe that would have been a good idea, but with hindsight, it's easy to say.
Hindsight is 2020.
Yeah, hindsight's 2020. But tactically speaking, because Greg Vanney did not reinvent TFC's wheel today, he went with what went really good for him in the playoffs so far this year. Was it a bit predictable for TFC to set up the way they did today? And when we look at Brian Schmetzer tactics, to literally just existing to use the lackadaisical attitude that Toronto had in the 50th minute and then ran with the rest of the game.
Fair enough. I understand why Greg Vanney went with Omar, which at the end of the day that was the change that TFC had for the finals as opposed to their 11 for the Eastern Conference final. Eastern Conference final. Yeah, I understand, and Omar is complete, and we were there. We were both there. His first game was against the Impact at Stade Saputo, and he really changed the way TFC played and just how consistently solid they were defensively. So I understand why Vanney decided to pull the trigger on him. Because players are all competitors and they all want to play in the final. So I'm assuming that there was some sort of conversation between Vanney and Omar Gonzalez in the run up to that game, and I'm sure Omar Gonzalez said, "Of course I'm ready. Of course I want to play in the final." And maybe the story of the game is maybe he should have just sat that one out. And the idea of having a 3-man backline is probably a good point. However, will a 3-man backline, would it have been a good idea to change your formation, the formation you went with since the start of the playoffs? I believe. I believe that was why change your formation for a final if you're gonna, why not stick to your guns in terms of playing with your formation and knowing what the automatics are, right? Knowing where the positioning, and why have to change that for one game, which is your most important game, let's face it. So having one sub as opposed to completely changing the face to try and include one player, I understand that, but that's where I think TFC sunk their boat, where they sunk their battleship, is including a player as decisive as he was throughout his time at TFC. Maybe that's what would cost them MLS Cup.
Maybe indeed. Also, the fact that I'm wondering where Seattle got the idea of really saving energy in the beginning of the game, letting Toronto exert themselves. They knew Toronto spent the last 2 games on the road, played at home the first game, and then they had to win 3 on the road to win MLS Cup. They did win 2 of them, and in the third one, they suffered horribly in this one. And we did see Seattle being a bit more fresh in my mind in the second half, taking advantage of the not 100% Omar Gonzalez, taking advantage of a banged up Josie Altidore, double teaming Josie Altidore. And this brings us this question. Was it a mistake to play Josie for Greg Vanney today? Is 35 minutes of a diminished Josie Altidore as dangerous as another player would have been? The fact is they don't have another player similar to it. And that's what Greg Vanney alluded to it in halftime to TSN mentioning that we don't have a big guy up top right now in the middle, a target. So maybe that's the reasoning why he put him on as early as he did, because he felt it was what was missing for Toronto to break down the last defender for Seattle, is that last pass to the target man to finally open up that defense.
Well, that's a fair question, and I'll answer with another question. Did Greg Vanney really have the choice to have a to put in a Josie Altidore as early as he did? And that, let's face it, is a talking point for what TFC might look like in 2020. Do you have, or do you try and gun for another to have more depth at the target man position because of things like that? Is someone else in your system, maybe someone in the academy, or someone that you have to bring in maybe on a smaller price from a lower division or whatnot? But is having depth or more depth at the target man position something that TFC is going to have to look for? Because as we saw, Josie went down, and really they were struggling to find some strength in specifically in the box, inside the box, because at some point TFC was struggling to try and get into Seattle's 18-yard box. So is that something? There's a lot of talking points. I mean, Michael Bradley coming back is another talking point, but when we're talking about a Toronto FC in their good years, they've always had more depth than they kind of showed. And now that Josie was down, he played maybe more than he should have. Maybe there should have been a place for another target man.
I absolutely agree. And if you look at the composition of this team for Toronto FC, the way it was put together, who put it together, it's a combination of a couple people's work. It's the work of Tim Batspachenko all the way up to February, and then Ali Curtis taking over once Tim Batspachenko went to Columbus. And then the Pozuelo aspect. It's a bunch of players coming from two different eras of Toronto FC put together. And the fact that they made it to MLS Cup is a surprise. And they won despite the fact of how they were put together. And not because, in spite, because they still won even though they were not put together the best way. Heading into next year and the year after, and more of a turnaround, I wouldn't say overhaul, but there's going to be some more pieces moving on from Toronto FC. Heck, tomorrow trade window opens, and a couple days from now, you'll have players being traded and picked and traded to the expansion teams like we've seen every year. So it is going to be a quick turnaround in Major League Soccer, and for TFC, it might continue to have a few movable pieces here and there. The Michael Bradley, like you mentioned, the fact that Toronto did not win, his contract is up for debate for next year. So
that kind of leads me to ask: is now, and is that trade window, that transfer window opening, where we'll see the Ali Curtis era really truly come to form? Will this team be completely ripped apart, and you're going to see maybe another kind of era coming in? Is a guy like Michael Bradley part of that era, or will we see Michael Bradley wearing another jersey come 2020? That'll be a really interesting point coming, and I wonder if, exactly that you said, I wonder if that run in MLS in the MLS playoffs, if that also changes what an Ali Curtis is going to try and do. Right at this point, you have a Michael Bradley taking this team to the MLS Cup Finals. Is that enough to make Ali Curtis say, "Well, you're back for another year"? Or is he, is he going to do his own rebuild and try and put more of his imprint onto that squad?
That's going to be the big questioning. At least with this run by Toronto FC, we're not wondering who's going to be the coach next year. It's going to be Greg Vanney. Same for Seattle. Those two coaches did have a similar journey this year, having both some spells. There were spells respectively with the club during the regular season. Both coaches turned things around and are the finalists in MLS Cup this year so far. Before we wrap things up for today, Tristan, I'm going to ask you one thing. What is your moment of the game today? Your moment that you knew things were settled in the game?
Yeah, the Victor Rodriguez goal. I want to say that it's the pass. I don't remember who gives it for Rodriguez, but that strike from outside the box. I mean, and you were saying a guy like Victor Rodriguez in the lead up was in the talks as who can be a difference maker for either team, and Victor Rodriguez was talked about, and he does it from outside the box. Really nice curler. Westberg can barely put his fingers on it, and at this point, 2-0. There was no Altidore yet, right? And I believe at this point, I think it was done and dusted for the Rave Green.
Yeah, that's a very good moment. I believe it's Lodero who gave the ball to Victor Rodriguez in the lead-up play. There was a foul there at the same moment, and then Rodriguez got the ball. And it's funny, we just talked about the lack of attacking depth with Toronto FC. Jordan Hamilton was the other striker that eventually got dealt to Columbus earlier this year. Let's just put it this way, earlier this year. I know that's correct. And also, Victor Rodriguez is a type of player that was missing for Toronto FC to maybe win a game like today. It's literally that second striker coming off the bench, or that second starting striker that gives more space to your other striker. So that in the future for Toronto FC will be necessary, because we know Toronto's still going to be a powerhouse in Major League Soccer for the next years to come. The only thing that is not for sure is it going to be with Josie, with Bradley, Pozuelo, and company, or will we see new players joining Pozuelo to continue what was started 4 years ago?
It's gonna be very interesting to see. I have no doubt in my mind that Toronto is going to spend on players. The only question here is who will be those players in question? Who will get the money from the intelligentsia over at TFC, and who will be the people running that team on the pitch for the next 3, 4, 5 years?
Now, once again, we want to congratulate the Seattle Sounders for their win in MLS Cup 2019, which means the season's over, Tristan.
Yeah,
which means what a season it has been. You hope you had the chance to read Tristan's work all season long on ProSoccer USA, which I suggest you follow Tristan and read his work on ProSoccer USA. If you haven't, then ProSoccer USA, a great platform for soccer fans in both of our countries, because it's not just in the United States, Tristan in Canada, and there's others. So a great platform to read about soccer.
Yeah, absolutely. Every league, we MLS, NWSL. I'm really happy we're in close to be in every market in at least in Canada and the US. And really prolific journalists over there.
And it's always a pleasure to have you on, Tristan. You can follow Tristan's work at Tristan Amours. This is going to wrap up our special coverage of MLS Cup this weekend. Well, we're back tomorrow, 11 a.m. Soccer Today, Monday to Friday. But this week, it's Monday to Tuesday. Wednesday, we're going on vacation, Duane and I, for a week. And we'll be back on the 22nd or so of November to start the offseason of Major League Soccer, which is going to be a fascinating one, Tristan. Before we say goodbye for the offseason, Tristan, do you think we're going to get a work stoppage in Major League Soccer this offseason?
Well, I was on the call with the MLS Players Association, and the word prepared for a work stoppage was said quite a bit. So I am not sure. The date to keep in mind is February 1st. February 1st is where or January 31st at 11:59. That's where the CBA, the current CBA, expires. And it is written in the CBA that there cannot be a work stoppage in the current time of the CBA. So if there is to be a lockout or there is to be a strike, it will happen on February 1st or thereafter.
And the thing is for both of us here in Montreal, if you didn't know, Tristan and I are based in Montreal, the Impact are qualified for the CONCACAF Champions League, and this would be the worst timing ever. But if you go back to history, last time the Montreal Impact went to the Champions League, it was also when CBA was negotiated, and it was close to work stoppage then, and it didn't happen. So I am confident, but it'll be a big story to keep an eye on this offseason, and especially come February 1st.
Yeah, and also the Seattle Sounders. They're in the Champions League. Well, Atlanta United and NYCFC are in the Champions League. There are, and if we still have some time to talk about the CBA, it's charter flights, it's contract, simplifying those contracts and making sure that player options are simplified. Free agency is a huge deal going into this offseason to have so the first step was to crack that offseason, to crack that free agency, to allow free agency to happen. According to the MLSPA, it was supposed to never happen, free agency in Major League Soccer. They ended up making it happen by the last CBA, and this year they really want a true free agency like we see in most of the North American sports, what we call the Big Four.
Yeah.
That's what they want. So I feel like this is going to be one of those kind of make or break free agency. That's probably what we're going to have to be looking for.
A free agency that you don't have to qualify for 10 different criteria or so to get it. So, because right now you have to be 28, you have to be 27 and over, 28 and over, or 7 years with the same club in Major League Soccer. Has to be the end of your second contract. You had to have a grandma that had red hair with a stepsister that is working as a dentist that knows a guy who's named Bob. If you actually have all those criteria, I think in 2019 you can be a free agent, but that's going to change for 2020.
And on both sides, if free agency doesn't end up happening, we're probably going to be looking at a strike or at a work stoppage or a lockout. And if it does happen, a lot of players have different futures. I mean, just in Montreal, there's a bunch of players that could be eligible for free agency that under the current CBA are not. And, we're looking at guys like Daniel Lovitz, but also guys like I'm forgetting his name, the goalkeeper.
Evan Bush?
The other goalkeeper.
Clément Diop.
Clément Diop, there you go.
No, the other goalkeeper, James Pentemis.
Yeah, but yeah, so in every situation, we're going to be looking at stuff, a lot of talking points going into the winter. Hopefully as soccer fans, we all want to see a season that starts in February, which is where it's supposed to start. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of tensions and a lot of ink is going to be spilled between now and February 1st for sure.
As always, when we talk about free agency, I want to say a little shout out to the first ever MLS player who became a free agent.
Justin Mapp.
Montreal's very own Justin Mapp. If you're listening, Justin, good job. You were the first ever free agent. Too bad your career did not go the way you wanted or we wanted after that moment. But you will always be the first ever free agent. On that note, we wish Tristan all the best for the offseason, and hopefully you enjoyed the coverage of Major League Soccer throughout the year on Soccer Today, and it will not stop. Next year is a big year in the history of Soccer Today and the Sports Podcast Network, so we hope that you continue to follow us at Kevin Laramee for myself, at Tristan Amours, at 24th Minute for Duane, and at Soccer Today SPN for this show. And as always, until tomorrow, have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.